Good morning, everyone. Once again, we are together in the series of talks about Spiritism, different themes, organized by the United States Spiritist Federation. And today we're going to have our special guest, José Mussi, or also known as Jo, and that will come to talk to us about protecting the vulnerable, Spiritism, and euthanasia. But hi, Joe. How you doing?
Hi, everyone.
Before we get him to talk to us, we are going to do our initial prayer as we normally do to connect with our high spirits, our friends who are here with us, inspiring all of us this morning. So let's close our eyes and concentrate, connect with the spirituality, thanking them for being with us, all the blessings that we have, the opportunity of studying, but more than anything, than supporting each other in these special times that we are going through. We thank them for this opportunity and ask them for the inspiration to involve in light and love our friend Jo from Canada that is with us today, bringing the lessons for us to reflect and learn. Thank you. So be it. And now that we are more prepared, before we get to the presentation of a very special topic this morning, good for reflection, we are going to introduce José Mussi officially, right? Formally. José Mussi was born in Brazil and graduated in electrical engineering by the University of Brasília. He first went to Canada to complete his master's degree and has made it home since 1990. In 2010, he and a small group of like-minded Spiritists founded the Toronto Spiritist Society with the mission of promoting and teaching Spiritism in English. José was also president of the Canadian Spiritist Council and represented Canada in the International Spiritist Council. Over the years, he has lectured in Canada, Brazil, US, and the Middle East. So let's remember to write our questions, to welcome Jo, and to prepare for our questions and answers after the talk. And now it's you, your words. Again, thank you for accepting our invitation, being with us here today, Jo.
Thank you very much, Tanya, and I am the one grateful for this opportunity. I thank the United States Spiritist Federation for this kind invitation to be here this morning to speak to all of the viewers who are out there in the social media. Strange times that we're living in, where we don't have the same opportunities to be close to one another, but thankfully we have the technology that allows us still be somehow connected. And as this lecture is focused around life and how we need to protect the ones who are most vulnerable in our society. Specifically, I'm going to be speaking about euthanasia, which is one of those things that we really don't think too much about it until something happens and we're right in the midst of these very difficult decisions in the lives of our own or those who we love. So euthanasia, it's a term that has existed obviously for many centuries, but now it has been into focus both in the medical, legal, and political scenes over the last, I would say, 30 years or so. I remember that maybe late 80s, early 1990s, there was a lot of kind of uncomfortable discussions that were happening with some proponents of this idea of the right to die, right? We always talked about the right to live, but certainly there was this new notion that we also have the right to die, and we see a lot of terms like die with dignity, personal choice, independence, and so forth. So as you see, this word map that we've created of the like-minded ideas that come with it, and much of it has evolved over the last decades or so, because now we're much more likely to die in a hospital than ever before. And this has brought some anxiety, some fears, and some apprehension of how it's going to be our last few hours or last few days of our lives. So let's talk a little bit about this. I know it's not the most comfortable subject, but it is one important within the bigger context that we as Spiritists always drive for, which is the importance, the value of life, this gift that has been given to us by God. Now, you notice in the lower left-hand corner, there is a little yellow symbol, and this is to remind us that this is the last few days of Yellow September, and I'll talk more about the end, but it is the month where we do a lot of promotions, a lot of conversations around suicide, what it means, and how to prevent it. So, really what we're talking here is a very difficult moral dilemma that not all of us will face, but many of us will, where it comes to a point where a person is suffering. It's in the last few moments of their lives, and the moments could be minutes, hours, days, or weeks, but that seems inevitable to them. There's a realization that nothing else can be done. And there is this feeling, this need to try to alleviate those last moments of pain and anguish by early death, by causing death to occur in a way that is not natural. The purpose of my conversation here with you today is not to make a moral judgment of those who choose this path, rather to explain and educate what we as Spiritists understand to be the consequences of those decisions, of those acts, and how we probably could avoid some of those consequences by taking a different approach to this difficult moment that it will happen to all of us. We talk about imminent death, but effectively, in some ways, we're all dying. As soon as we're born, we start to count down to the day that we'll go back to where we began, where we belong in the spiritual world. So I'm sure that most of you would have seen some level of this discussion, and in some cases often come up in the public eyes, and in the US have been, remember, if those who are a bit older might remember Dr. Kevorkian, who was a great advocate for assisted dying, or at the time was called assisted suicide. And there's a lot of arguments that these proponents, these people bring to bear, right? And you can't ignore them. Some of them seem to be fairly practical or compassionate. So you hear everything from, well, this is a private matter. I'm not doing anything. It's me. I'm making the decision. And I'd like somebody to just help me do the things that I might not be able to do myself. There's this idea of the patient that has the right to die when they want to. Right? So it's ultimately in terms of this liberal concept that we have the right to do anything that we want to ourselves as long as we don't interfere with others. Well, in some ways, that could be a valid argument, but no death is in isolation. No death impacts only the person who is migrating back to the spiritual world. It has a broader impact in all of those people who they touch, who they love, and who love them. The right to life is not a right simply to exist. It's a right to a life with a minimum quality and value. So now we're saying, back within the same idea that I can make my choices, that I have the right to choose the minimum quality of life that I have. If I don't have that minimum quality, then it's not worth living, right? That one, to me, is a bit weaker kind of argumentation. And we'll talk a lot about the mental state of the individual who's making those decisions. So what is minimal quality? No matter how difficult our lives will be, I can assure you that there are many other people who are suffering much more. They're living in much more difficult situations than you are. So who are we to say arrogantly that, this is not good enough? This life is not good. There's this notion of right to die in dignity and without pain. Well, I don't know where you get those right from. And the concept of dignity really starts to come up more and more as we hear about how people die in hospitals, how it is cold, how they are alone, or they're with strangers that they don't know, or the nurses or the doctors or even the assistants who are there, and that this is no way to die, that I deserve to have more dignity in my death. Well, again, if we see how this pandemic has brought to light a lot of this, we see even worse cases now that you can't come in to the hospital even when someone is sick because of the pandemic. And yes, people are dying alone or with the hospitals. We see Zoom deaths where people are watching their loved ones die through Zoom. And it's not great, right? It's terrible. It's really difficult. But as we will see, there is a reason for everything that we go through. And maybe this is just something that we had to experience. The next one is, again, around personal freedom, personal autonomy. It has to always be my choice of everything. Well, it is a selfish point of view, and one can argue one way or the other, whether we have the right to be selfish or not. But still, it is something that you hear a lot. And the last one is given as a pro-euthanasia, but I think, to me, it's almost the argument against it, right? Is that some people who are sick, who are in palliative care or about to go to palliative care, they worry about the financial burden of their condition will take for days, weeks, or years sometimes that they will stay. And this burden will be taken upon their relatives, their families, their children, and so forth. So they choose to, okay, I'm not going to leave this with my loved ones, so I might as well die because I'm not useful anyway. It is a sad reflection of our society that we have to make those kind of choices based on something so artificial as the economic aspects of it, of the cost. This doesn't happen in every country, but certainly it is something that's very predominantly discussed in the US, given how its healthcare system is structured. Now, the arguments against euthanasia really fall into two big groups. One is the professional implications. And we're going to talk about the role of medical professionals in this act. But as soon as you involve somebody like a doctor, a nurse, or a nurse practitioner in assisting somebody's death, you are in some ways violating their own oath of doing no harm. It is a difficult defense to say that killing someone is actually avoiding harm, when in fact the purpose of medicine was to keep people alive, to keep them well and keep them comfortable. This can compromise the role of the healthcare workers. Of course, we don't see any place that mandates this and makes it mandatory for doctors to perform such act. But still, you got to think that those who are doing it, unless they really passionately believe in this function, that it is undermining their own oath to protect and serve their patients. The other aspect of it is that we're not infallible. We are imperfect. We make mistakes, right? And so does the patient. We see that, and we'll discuss a little bit about this notion of mental aptitude to make such decision. But can we not be fallible in that? Could we not think that somebody is mentally capable and in fact they're not? And how about this idea of imminent death? How many cases have we seen of people that miraculously, and we know it's not a miracle the way that a lot of people think, but there is the ability for these people to turn around, and you still have months, if not years, of a better life. So how do we kind of protect everyone from these situations, right? How do we make sure that we're not making the wrong decision? So these are all the professional, in some ways, legal implications of all of this discussion. But moreover, moral and theological considerations is what we're going to be talking more here about, is this whole notion that it's a homicide. You may call it a murder. Homicide is effectively killing a person in an unnatural way, forcing their premature death, which for us, Spiritists, and for most, if not all, Christians, it violates this idea of the sanctity of human life, which is, for all we have, or the holiest gift that God has given us, given to humankind. He created us in the spirit of love. It is a gift that we have to be in existence, to be alive, to be incarnated. And who are we to simply throw that away and break it? Imagine if you're in a position of receiving that gift directly, any gift from God or Jesus Christ, and then you just say, okay, thank you very much, but I'm going to just throw it away. So that's why in Spiritism and in most of Christianity, in Islam as well, the sanctity of life, it is a primordial concern, and nothing we should do should encourage people to do otherwise. So before we go into the euthanasia discussion, let's talk a little bit about this notion of death, because we might think that death is something simple, but in fact, it's not, and it has changed over time, right? The old concept that lasted for most of our existence as humanity in this planet is that as soon as the heart and the breathing stop, you were dead. Well, now we know, and we have known for decades, that that's not necessarily true. We can bring somebody back who have stopped, the heart has stopped for many minutes, or the breathing has stopped. We have seen people who have been underwater in cold lakes and rivers for many, many minutes, 15, 20 minutes, and brought back to a normal life. So this has evolved into the more modern concept that death really is defined as the cessation of all of biological functions that can sustain a particular living organism, that the cells are still alive. To be dead means that we have lost control of our breathing, our temperature, the balance of chemical elements, electrolytes in our body. We obviously lost consciousness, and basically neuroendocrine regulation. So this is what we lay people know as brain dead, right? And the criteria for a doctor to define death is that it must be the irreversible cessation of electroactivity in the whole brain, as opposed to just the neocortex, right? So it's not just the immediate things that we can see from the outside, but knowing what's happening inside. And now we have equipment, we have ability to measure that. So, well, this is the death, and even in that notion is, the same can be true about our notion of a terminal disease. What is a terminal disease? How do we know it's really terminal, and how do we know that there is no cure or the patient will not recover? So this aligns very much with the notion of death in the Spiritism. If we go back to the place we always go back to, which is the Spirit's book, question 136 is the question that Kardec asks the spirits: the body, is the soul independent of the vital principle? And the spirits respond that the body is only the envelope of the soul, as we have repeatedly told you. And he continues with, says, can a body exist without a soul? Yes, but it is only when the body ceases to live that the soul quits it. Previous to birth, the union between the soul and the body is not complete. When this union is definitely established, it is only the death of the body that can sever the bonds that united to the soul, and thus allow the soul to withdraw from it. Organic life may vitalize a body without a soul, but the soul cannot inhabit a body deprived of organic life. So in sense, it is that full death of the body that allows the spirit to be released. And in the spirit's definition, that is death. Death happens when the spirit is no longer attached to the body. And we're trying with our technology to try to more and more be very certain that that has happened. And what would happen to our body if the soul had left? Well, it's just material, it's flesh. Without intelligence, there's nothing you can choose to call it but the body of a man or a woman. So the cause of death of organic being is the exhaustion of their bodily organs, which 100 and so years later, finally medicine catches up and has the same definition. So now we know what death is. We know that we can only guarantee that death has occurred when the spirit has left. But it also means that the organic body has to be killed. And this is what assisted death is actually doing, killing the organic body and then releasing the spirit prior to the planned date, the date that they were actually planned to leave the body. It's an early death in some ways. Now, we're talking about euthanasia and assisted death, so let's put some definitions. And just, again, just to continue to express how complicated and complex this subject is. There's the concept of dystonasia, which comes from, basically means bad death in Greek. What is a bad death? This is when a person is seen to be kept alive artificially in conditions where otherwise they cannot survive. This is, I would say, many people's worst nightmare, is that they are being kept alive through machines and they're extending their life beyond the natural life. So if they were being left to a natural death, they would have been dead. Now we're extending it, and there's really no condition that it will ever come back. This is certainly one of those scenarios where people would say, well, pull the plug, right? This is no longer done. And because of exactly this, of people, particularly those in coma, that our medicine has evolved the definition of death to the brain death. Because now they can at least assess that from existing definitions, that body is just a body being kept alive through machines. It's that what the Spiritist book said. There's no spirit there. It's just flesh. But we can keep the flesh alive. We're that good. But what does this mean? The person is not dead. The body is not dead. The spirit has left. So technically, from a Spiritist view, turning off the machine is not killing, because he's no longer alive. It's just a flesh that's not going to be kept in a freezer or whatever, or in these machines, to be perceived that there's some kind of function still taking place. Now, there's also the idea of orthothanasia, or passive euthanasia. And this is similar to when people are very sick, and this used to be the case before, when I know I've been given a diagnosis of terminal disease. I've gone through all the treatments, and then at a certain point, I decide I no longer want to be treated. I don't want any more medication. I don't want any more. I just want to wait it out and that nature or God take me. And this could be as simple as I just described, or in other cases, it could be don't even give them food or water. So in this case, you're actually forcing them to die even earlier, right? It's also one of it's called passive euthanasia, because we're not doing anything to specifically terminate the life, but we know that what we're doing, it will inevitably avoid any chance of helping them, even keeping them alive longer. So these are two kind of extremes. But then we have the actual euthanasia, which is called a good death. So this is the practice of intentionally ending a life in order to relieve pain and suffering. And we have examples from wars where soldiers were very injured and they were in the middle of a field. Their colleagues will often be asked to kill them in order for them to stop the suffering. And it's what a lot of the assisted death discussion or assisted dying discussion ends up being. It's around euthanasia. And then there is the notion of palliative care. And this is a little bit like the previous passive euthanasia, but it's not that actually. It's just the notion that the patient can no longer be treated. There's no chance of recovery. And what you're doing is putting them in a kind of a setting that is comfortable, that is at least less aggressive, less cold, a little bit warmer, and then just giving them pain management and waiting for the moment where death will come. So you see many different things that really come under this umbrella of called assisted dying now. And as I said, it involves ethical, moral values of each person, and it could be different. If I'm atheist and I don't believe any of this, my perceptions of this theme will be quite different. There's the medicine in terms of when do we give up? Should we just give up and let the patient die? Should we actually have them die? And then the legal aspects. Well, it is a homicide. Is it a legal homicide or is it a crime? And I'll talk a little bit about the Canadian experience and what I see also happening in the US. And this whole notion of immortality brings a complete different layer into this discussion, especially the ethical and moral values. Because if we believe that there is an afterlife and that our acts are all in some ways judged or measured against certain expectations, then this has an implication in terms of our decision to ask to be killed. Let me talk a little bit about the experience in Canada. When I first gave this lecture, it was 4 years ago, 3.5 years. And just then, Canada had just legalized medical assisted dying, or also called MAID. There was already some provinces that allowed this to happen, but we basically legalized this under very strict rules still, but it is legal in Canada to ask assistance to die if you meet all of the criteria. And just recently, there was a report published which shows what the outcome has been, and it hasn't been as grim as some of the most opponents described it. It hasn't been as good as other defenders said it would be. But notice that the number of deaths in Canada under this program, and remember we have universal health, so this is actually paid by the government, has increased to the point that last year, over 5,600 people died using this mechanism of having a medical assistance in dying. And this is the first report that actually came out. So it took them 4 years. And you see that it varies from one jurisdiction to another. Some places like the West Coast are more prone to happen this. There's a larger number of older people living there as well. But in average, about 2% of deaths in Canada last year were medically assisted deaths. Seems like a large number. It is growing. And so there is obviously all of these souls that have chosen in their own opinion to terminate their lives early. And unfortunately, one of those numbers is a person I knew. This shows kind of the age group, and as we'd expect, the vast majority are older people who are more likely to have a terminal disease. But nevertheless, there are quite a significant number of very young people who are also taking this path out to end their lives. And this does not include, obviously, all of those kind of more direct suicides that may take. If people are not authorized to use the program, they can still choose to kill themselves in other means. I brought this slide because it's an interesting statistics that, there was a lot more people who requested to be killed this way. But you notice that almost 13% actually die before they are authorized to go through the procedure, which gives us some sense that in fact are those individuals who are very close to dying that are requesting this more frequently, right? They are not people who are in the early stages of terminal disease. These are people who are within days and weeks of actually being dead, that they decided to request some kind of medical assistance. It's not a comfort at all, because we know that these people still have the burden of having thought and actually started to proceed with this this suicide attempt. The ideation of suicide was there from the beginning, and they just happened to reach their time before that. So we see that from 0, we're up to 2% now. This is obviously, it is an individual decision. We are not here to judge them. If they don't believe in any things that we believe, how can we convince them that they shouldn't be doing this, right? And that's kind of the approach that many of the politicians have taken in this path. But it does worry us because, as I mentioned, how do we know that these people are really mentally fit? How do we know? What do we really know about the mental health of individuals? And can we convince them with proper attention and time and love to hold on just a little bit more? Those people who didn't die within the timeline, the 4,000 or so people, could have waited a few more days or weeks and have gone through a natural death, which for us would allow them a much easier transition and consequences in the afterlife. And when we have any kind of a moral dilemma, where do we go to? We go to one of our favorite books, The Gospel According to Spiritism. And in chapter 5, Blessed are the afflicted, and this is coming directly of the Sermon on the Mount, right? The question is, should we end our neighbor's probation or tests or life? And the question is, should anyone put an end to another's probation when they can, or should God's purpose be respected, so leaving things to take their own course? Kardec asked this question, but it is a loaded question already, because should we respect God? That in itself is an easy answer. We should always respect God's wish, right? Because he knows the consequence. He knows the path that we should be taking. So the spirits kind of pushed his ears. We always told you that repeatedly, right? That the whole point of you being alive in this planet is for atonement, for concluding your trials. And everything that you're suffering is a consequences of your acts, most of them from past lives. It is then trying to run away without paying your debt, right? So cutting short the suffering is like, paying 80% of your debt and then running away and not pay the other 20%. And they keep asking, how do you know what's in store for you? How do you know the divine providence has placed for you, not as an instrument of torture, but as a soothing balm of consolation to heal the wounds, right? Everything that we do wrong actually is hurtful to us, much more than it is the people to which we are hurt, right? So these moments, these tests are means by which we heal those wounds. So you're actually taking away this and creating new wounds that you're going to have to deal with later in future lives. Let me see what means our merciful Father has put within my reach so that I may lessen the suffering of my brother sister. Let me see if moral consolations, material help, or advice can assist in overcoming these trials with greater energy, patience, resignation, loving, talking, praying for those in suffering, using whatever mechanism we can to help them cope with those trials. And this is where a lot of the pain medication comes in, and being just present and providing the grace of the prayer. Let me see if God has given me the means of putting an end to this suffering. Perhaps this possibility has been given to me as a test or even an atonement, so that I may allay these troubles and substitute them with peace. Right? So remove the suffering without killing the individual. So really what we have to is apply the maximum strength to attenuate the bitterness of atonement without fear of consequence, being certain that only God has the right to shorten or prolong a trial as he sees fits. So we'll be judged in how we kind of were able to sustain those trials. Because assisted death, make no mistake, it is a suicide. It is I asking somebody to help me kill myself. A man is agonizing under cruel suffering. His state is known to be desperate. Would it be licit to save him a few instants of anguish by hastening his end? Yes, we do this to our dogs, our pets, animals, horses who get hurt. Why can't we do this to a human being? Isn't that not the greatest demonstration of compassion and love? That's the question. And then, the first phrase says it all. Who has given you the right to prejudge God's purpose? So if you believe in God, you should not question what he's doing to us. If you believe in God, in an all-loving God, then you know that he's doing this for our own good. Can he not conduct a person to the very brink of the grave and then withdraw them in order that they may awaken and recognize the need to change their ideas? And we know so many stories like that. Even when a dying person has reached the last extremes, no one can be absolutely sure the final hour has arrived. Has science never been wrong in its prediction? Of course it's been wrong. We're not perfect. We make mistakes. Science makes mistakes, and it changes courses, and it gets better. Of course, there are cases which, with good reason, can be considered desperate. But even if there's no hope of a definite return to life and health, there always exists a possibility. Testify of many occasions of a sick person recovering their faculties at the last instance. We also see this expression, this is the swan song, right? The last moment of conscience, of awareness. Well, then, this is the hour of grace conceded by God, which may be of extreme importance. You do not understand the reflection which the Spirit may have during those last agonizing convulsions, nor how a lightning repentance may save them from many torments. So those minutes, those few seconds where the patient comes back, seems normal, just before they die, those are precious moments that are, in some ways, a reward for them for suffering and accepting the trials up to the last minute. Now, for the materialist, who only sees the body and does not take into consideration the spirit, it's not up to understand these things, and we can't force other people to understand these things. But the spiritist who knows what happens in the afterlife, and we do know what happens, we've read many stories, comprehends the value of these thoughts. So mitigate less suffering as much as you can, but guard yourself against abbreviating life. Make it easier, but don't take it away. Even for a minute, as this minute means the avoiding of many tears in the future. And when he sees the future, the next lives. So we're doing good for our own selves. Just as an example, we know that the anguish and the pain that Jesus experienced just before he returns back home to the Father. And imagine, you were there just before he was walking and being whipped, he's being shamed, he was bleeding, he was hurting, he was carrying terrible burdens. Who of us, knowing who Jesus is, would not have thought about saving him from such terror, right? So he wouldn't have to be crucified, he wouldn't have to be nailed to the cross, he wouldn't have to spend hours bleeding before he died. Now, what would have happened if somebody had been merciful to Jesus? That would have been kind and compassionate and had killed him before he had to go through all of those few hours of tremendous suffering. Well, Christianity would not have changed us. Christianity itself would have been completely different. Jesus would not have been crucified. He would not have pardoned the repentant thief. So you're now hurting him as well. Truly I say to you, today you shall be with me in paradise. Lovely words. Jesus would not have spoken to his mother, Mary, and John. Woman, here is your son, and to the disciple, here is your mother. From that time on, the disciple took her into his home. He took care of Mary, and he took the church in his hands. Jesus would not have forgiven humankind, and this would have been, imagine, he would never have heard these words. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. We don't know what our destiny is, even in the last minutes. So let's make sure that we understand all of this, because I haven't been in this position, and I hope that I don't. But let's at least remember all of the teachings, all of the things that we learned about the consequences. And Givaldo, he wrote a whole book on this called Euthanasia Nunca, or Euthanasia Never. And in this book, he reminds us that life on earth is an experience called reincarnation with the purpose of educating us to the great flight of immortality. So it's not about just ending this life, it's what does it mean to begin the next life? And we should always ponder this and really have faith in God that he is doing all he can for our own improvement, for our own good. So, in summary, when there is no hope that anything will improve, the immortal spirit, and remember, we are immortal spirit, we will always be rewarded for the trials of our existence. And these last few minutes, as hard as they can be, as unbearable that they may feel, they will end. There is a moment that they will end. And this is part of our experience. We are here not just for the good things, we're here for the bad things, for the difficult things, and even for the most painful things. So as I said in the beginning, Yellow September, this is a month every year that we take to remind ourselves that suicide is another pandemic. Hundreds of thousands of people kill themselves every year, and no country is immune to that. A lot of different reasons, a lot of different factors that is causing this not only to continue, but actually to increase. The COVID pandemic has, in fact, made it more crucial because of the stress, the depression, the anxiety that it has created for those who were most vulnerable already. And this is why I call this protecting the vulnerable, because we are vulnerable when we're in pain. We're vulnerable when we're suffering. We're vulnerable when we don't see a way out. And just trying to justify that the best path is to help them commit suicide is the wrong path. Spiritism is certainly very clearly against any such act, and we should remember at every stage. Thank you very much for everyone who has taken the time to listen to these humble words. And I think now we can go to the questions and answers if there are any. Thank you again to the United States Spiritist Federation for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Jo. It's like you said, it's a tough subject to think about, but it is definitely important that we take the time, and nobody is free from feeling that way or being in that situation, right? I mean, it's sometimes we prefer not to think about it, and then we are facing some situations, and it's good to have this kind of a process in all different levels, like you mentioned. We cannot just think one way or another. And yeah, it's a good month for us to be talking about it. I liked when you said about the reminder that we are vulnerable. It's so hard on ourselves to think that way, because we prefer to think how tough we are, how we believe in God, so we are, we are good people, and we do these things without any problems, and then suddenly something happens and we need to think a little harder, right? So we will go to the questions that came in different Facebook, YouTube, and to our website, and discuss a little bit more about all this. Thank you again for this tough one, but important subject. So we have here, thinking of how much a death of someone impact others. Is it selfish to feel we can decide to die whenever we decide?
It is selfish. It is selfish, even though you might think otherwise. You might think that you're doing everybody a favor, right? Because, wow, I'm dying, I'm spending money, I'm in the hospital, everybody is sad, everybody is suffering with me. So why not just terminate this, end this right now, and then everybody will forget me and everybody will be fine. But the trauma, the pain, the guilt all of those feelings survive the death of that person, and its burden falls upon those that they love.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're just thinking about yourself, and I can understand why, we are imperfect, and selfishness was one common characteristic that I guess all of us have to admit to some level of acting in our own interest. And if I'm suffering, if I'm in terrible pain, if I can't stand it anymore, if I have been already gone through this weeks, months, years going through this pain, and now the end seems near and the pain seems greater, so why not just do everybody a favor and just end this right now? And again, you're vulnerable. You're not necessarily understanding the full consequences were going to happen. Now, one thing I did not address in my lecture, and I'll just mention briefly, which is even the darkest side of this, is when family members are trying to influence the person to do a medically assisted death, to die sooner. Because they're suffering, and I have other things to do. I have my family to raise. I can't be going to the hospital every day or every week, and the bills are adding up. So I will constantly remind my loved one, which I would argue that you don't love them that much, that maybe you should. Why there's a way for you to stop the suffering and so forth. And they are being selfish now, completely selfish, and influencing. This is where the whole discussion around mental capability comes into play. How do we know the person, beyond their own suffering, beyond their anguish that they have, are they not being influenced by other people, whether it's doctors, insurance company, parents, or more likely children, to make this decision? Remembering that all of the great part of the consequence is still based on your own free will.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. And how much sometimes we get a little confused, let's say, about this idea of trying to help somebody. Even that sometimes it's a mistake, because some people say, but I'm trying to help the person really to make that decision. It's have to be careful with those kinds of help, right? Very careful.
That's what we call the loving mistakes.
Yeah, we make a lot of mistakes in the name of love. Let's face it, right? Okay, let's go to a next question. Do you think people say freedom as free will? I think you did mention the word free will. So let's compare the word freedom and free will. They think God let us do whatever we decide to do, and this is one of the choices we are making.
Yeah, I think so. I think that is fair to say, that part of my ability to decide, to have the choices I make, it is free will. It's absolutely free will. And free will is not necessarily, I wouldn't say a right. It is just something that God has given us. But remember, He has given us free will as a means by which we will learn, make mistakes, and get better and improve, right? And what we're having with this discussion is giving ourselves and the people in these terrible situations some information that could help them make a better choice. It is still going to be at the end of the free will, because if it wasn't free will, they would never be accountable for the decision.
Mm-hmm.
There are obviously instances the person is completely disconnected, has no real mental capability to make a decision, and somehow they are manipulated into it, that in some ways their free will has been very limited. And of course, it will have lesser impact on them than for those who intentionally drove them to that decision. When I put decision in quotes, because it was more of a imposition than a decision.
Mm-hmm. So, Kan, you're saying that everybody in this picture that you said has a responsibility. They kind of share the consequences of this decision, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Assisted death is no different than the debate we have about suicide. But It only because in assisted death, we've put a little box around it and say, this is only applicable to people who have terminal conditions that are sane of mind and would like to end their lives now rather than later. And they're going to die anyway very soon, so we might as well give them that choice. But otherwise, the choice to die is still the same. The ideation of death, the ideation of what will happen with my death, the consequences material for those who are left behind. And if I believe in a future of a immortal life, the implications of this is all part of that ideation. And that ideation is the moment of vulnerability. And this is true for any person that is thinking of killing themselves. I might argue that these people here in this scenario probably have a better reason than others, but that still does not change the ethical and moral and spiritist implications of the decision.
Yeah. Well, on that note, we are talking about when people has a terminal ill, but apparently there are in some countries that will allow that decision more freely, right? Kind of the person, for example, is paralyzed and doesn't want to live that way anymore, and just decide that we'll get this assisted euthanasia or assisted suicide, I should say, in this case. The person just decides that it's not worth living like that anymore. So I think there is more, some places, some countries will be even more open to any situation, other situations, not necessarily terminally ill, right?
Yeah, in Canada, the conditions are very strict, and that's why the number is, I don't want to say small, but it's controlled, is because you have to have some notion that you will have irreversible terminal consequences to your condition. And it has to be in a reasonable, foreseeable future.
Okay. Yeah. As you said, who knows, right? This is hard to tell. Okay, let's go to the next question. We have, does every moment count, even in a vegetative kind of life? Person is in a coma.
I think I mentioned that. If it's truly vegetative, if there is no more brain activity, if we believe that the spirit has left the body, then it doesn't count. Death has already actually occurred, so turning off the machine is not actually assisted death in that case. And that's why there's so much research and so much care to identify, is that the case? We still don't have a test to see if the body has a spirit or not, so we have to rely on medicine for that today in terms of the type of criteria they have established for that. But philosophically and spiritually, if the body's being kept alive mechanically, in what we may call, the word vegetative is not used anymore because it doesn't really reflect what's happening inside the person, right? So they could be outside, kind of completely in coma, and that used to be the term for anybody in coma was a vegetative state. Now we know that that's not the case. But let's imagine the vegetative here is really no more brain activity, no more kind of conscious abilities whatsoever in the body. So for our definition of death, the spirit has left that body. It's just the body that's there. So you're killing the organic body, but the spiritual body has left.
But you mean if the spirit is still connected there, even if the person is there not doing too much, just lying down there, but the spirit is connected still, that spirit is taking advantage of the reincarnation,
Right.
the kind of
it's still living. So that definition, we're still alive, right? And we don't know exactly how much we're still perceiving what's happening outside, what we're doing, or we just inside kind of in a meditation kind of mode, understanding all of the things that we have done and contemplating that. As long as the spirit is still there, it is counting. If the spirit has left the body, it's just flesh.
Yeah, just flesh. Yeah. Okay. Let's see our next one. Okay, we have a question here from Fernanda Silveira from Austin and from the United States Spiritist Federation too. Although in Spiritism we believe that euthanasia is against God's laws, should we create laws to criminalize it?
Well, there's always been laws that criminalizes homicide, right? But we also always have exceptions to that. In a way, to criminalize what is perceived as a merciful act upon others with their consent, for non-believers of God, or non-believers of an eternal soul, is imposing our beliefs upon them. So we should not do that, right? So we should not tell that these people should be criminals and so forth. We should try to create every means by having an open discussion, by having clarity, without trying to impose our beliefs. Because we know that at the end of the day, at the end of, not the day, but our existence, all of this is taken care of by the laws of cause and effect, action and reaction, right? What we're trying to do is tell people that think about this, think about the possibility that there is an eternal life, and think of what this could imply and mean to you for everything that comes after, right? And that's why the discussion at a legal perspective is slow and complicated. There are actually 9 states in the District of Columbia in the US that allow assisted death. In the US, it's mostly restricted for the ability of the doctor to prescribe the medication to the patient that will kill them. Mm-hmm. So they can get a prescription of lethal drugs. And then the patient can actually take those drugs whenever they wish. So that's still where it is in the US. In Canada, it is the ability, for example, for a doctor to inject this medication. So the doctors or the nurses can do that, or even their family, right? And they can do this. The purpose of creating the legislation is to ensure that if all of these rules are followed, nobody will be put in jail afterwards, right? They're not going to be charged with anything. But all of this is very kind of still complicated. I was just reading about a case in the Netherlands a few years ago where a patient said, I would like to be euthanized if this and this was going to happen, if I'm not able to make decisions, if I'm in kind of mechanically kept alive. And it took 3 or 4 years for that situation to actually happen. And when the doctor talked with the family and decided this is the moment that the patient had predicted 3 or 4 years ago, and now they're not in sane mind to make that decision, would you like to make the decision? The family said, go ahead. They performed the assisted dying. But then there was a lot of questions because apparently the patient was still able to move and stand up. They actually sedated the patient before applying the lethal dosage. So you start to see the ethical and the gray lines that you have in all of this. It doesn't end the discussion. It just highlights how this is so difficult, so complex, and we're not perfect, right? Mistakes can be made.
Yeah. And that reminds me a little bit of a situation when they, decide to unplug the machines, and then the patient is, thinking the patient would die in a few hours or so, and then the patient is still there, days and days, and then they stop feeding the patient, right? Which is forcing, again, the organic life to cease, correct? Anyway, complicated. Another question coming from Fernanda. I think you touched that a little bit too, but let's say one thing is to believe it and not to do it personally. However, should we dictate what others should or shouldn't do?
We're not judges. right? We're not here to force anybody, because then we're taking the responsibility upon us. We're taking away their free will, right? We don't dictate. We can educate. That's the best we can do. And we can pray. We can educate, we can pray, and we can be there if that person needs our assistance at any time.
Yeah. One other question, and regarding responsibilities, how do you think that this can be a way that people feel to remove their own responsibility as suicide and put the responsibility in the system? They feel relieved that they can get the same results with somebody else doing the action.
I don't think so. I do believe that people don't take this decision lightly. It's not something, well, you know, it's okay. Let's do this. No, I think it is a long process. It is a difficult process. It is under tremendous stress. And I think that the last thing that they're thinking is that I'm going to pass this responsibility to somebody else. Now, for the second part of the question, I think, yes, they still have that, you know, we know that one of the laws that God has created is the law of preservation, right? So that is in every person, regardless of what their belief is and what it's not. And the law of preservation makes us try to protect our lives rather than take it. It's there. So it takes a great effort to cross the line and disregard that very kind of deep feelings that we have. So having somebody else do it can help us push us through that last few inches of that discussion, right? Because I'm not going to do it, somebody else is going to do it, so it's really not suicide. So in some ways, they're pushing the responsibility, sharing the responsibility with someone else, but they do know that they could screw it up if they try to do it themselves, because so many people who try to commit suicide fail in the first time or the first 2 or 3 times. They fail because their spirit is actually fighting that. It's fighting that act because it knows that it's not the right thing to do.
Yeah. Sometimes just trying to get rid of the pain, right? Not necessarily getting rid of life, but that's the outcome, obviously, right?
It is a fear, right? No matter what your beliefs or you don't believe, there's a fear, okay, what's going to happen, right? Yeah. Is it only going to end and I'll disappear and I'll have no more thoughts? But what if there is thoughts? What will I remember? Will I remember the pain? Is that the last memories that I will have forever? I don't know. Everybody will have those questions in their minds if they don't have a strong religious belief.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see. One more question. Do you know if these people have to go through any psychological evaluation before making the decision?
Not before making the decision, but before the decision or the request is accepted. So in Canada, they have to demonstrate that they are in sane mind, that they are not under extreme duress, besides the fact that they're dying, which is a stress in itself. But yes, someone who is not mental, like, for example, if you have a severely disabled child, right? You cannot make the decision to end their lives for them.
Okay, let's see. We still have a few more. For people who don't believe in spirituality, life continuing, or anything in these terms, feel death is the end, any ideas of what to say to them about the value of life?
That's a tough one. There isn't much you can say if they haven't really kind of incorporated that into their belief system. By the time they're in this position, it's not the pain that's going to make them change their minds, right? And they would just see this as more of what they've heard through their lives. When you're in that position of coming close to death, you can take a few different paths, right? One is to really put yourself concerning about what will happen after death and if there is eternal life. Or others is just living day by day, right? If you're feeling materialist at this time, all you can do is, as I said, talk to them, be there, give them whatever support they need, not for the decision, but anything else to make them comfortable, and pray for them, pray for their soul, because as we believe, they will go through some trials in the afterlife for the decision they're making.
Yeah. And also the amount of knowledge and everything counts, right? So it's in terms of as it continues, what we take to the other life and the decisions we make, we know that our responsibilities still according to what we really know and where we are spiritually. So let's not get desperate, right? When, especially for those people that are going through this and going through this process, or somebody who had that done before and then they regret afterwards. I think you said something very key, which is the judgment. It's so important that we are there just to support whatever, and being together. And when you said about praying or about, but also not being the ones pointing our fingers at anybody, because sometimes when we hear, oh, this the religion is against this, or the legally there is this problem, or this, people ended up getting to this defensive mode instead of listening, or instead of feeling supported. So it is a tough, very tough decision to make. Either if you are in that position or in the position of making the decision with a loved one. So we need really to be there, bringing, like you said, the information, and I think not be shy also and talk about the spirituality, when even for people that that they don't believe, would you still say something related to spirituality to put that into their decision-making process? Would you? What do you think?
The reality is, again, it's not our role to change people's mind against their will, right? What we should avoid, as you said, is first, we should not point fingers. But another thing that we do frequently that is equally as wrong is turn our backs on them.
Yeah.
Give up on them, right? Don't give up. If you care about that person, don't give up. Don't blame them. Don't be angry with them. Feel compassion for them. Pray for them. And at the end, it is their free will to make this decision. As long, and I'm saying this if the person is in good mind. And like I said, I have this example. It wasn't a close friend. It was a colleague at work. And he became terminally ill while I was away in Dubai. And I didn't know anything about this, so I wasn't connected to him. But he actually planned the day of his death about 2.5 months before he died. He set the date. He got permission. And then he got his family together and he terminated his life. Yeah, he was Hindu. So in Hinduism, it's not as clear in terms of this opinion about terminating life or early death, because they do believe in eternal lives, but different flavors of that. And he was a very logical kind of person, very organized and so forth. So I can actually see him making the kind of the equations, pros and cons, and it looks like this is a better idea. And I'll terminate I had a good life, but he was fairly young. So he was in his mid-60s, right? So it was hard for me to hear months later that he had done this. I didn't have a chance to reach out or even know that he was sick. But again, this wasn't a light decision. This was not a spur of the moment decision. And we can only pray for his soul.
Do you, one thing that came to mind that people probably are wondering is the situation, the spiritual situation of the influence of obsessors or other spirits in this process, in this decision-making process. Would you like to say something about this to us?
anytime we're vulnerable, we're open for having those type of influences. I think it would be just simplistic to say that the person's making decisions just because bad spirits are coming to them and making them, or somehow forcing them to make this decision. Is the vulnerability that opens up to this. And these spirits could be discarnated or incarnated, as I said before. We're all open to be influenced. And again, this speaks to the level of evolution that we're at. That's why prayer is important, because as we pray, we provide some level of protection or provide some mechanism to strengthen the individual, the spirit, against those influences.
Thank you. We'll have one last question before we ask you for some final remarks, unless some other pops up, but we should be in our last question. From Glaucio Pessoa from Atlanta, good friend also. What should we say to children who can no longer bear the sight of their suffering parents in a painful terminal condition?
Well, it all depends what you mean by children. I'm my mom. I'm still a child to her, right? So we're all children in some senses. And it's never good to see the sight of suffering parents. I think this comes very much to the concept of the belief in God. It is that belief that allows us to have hope and faith that this is being done, and that person is going to be, I don't want to say the word rewarded, but it is the right thing to be doing, right? And that the suffering and the pain and everything else will be something that will strengthen that spirit in their eternal journey. If they are very young children, you should avoid as much as possible for them to be present under these worst moments, and tell them about how your mom or dad is returning to a good place. But before they get there, they have to go through this period. But they will be rewarded. They will be next to Jesus and to God once this is all over.
You know, our perception of pain and suffering, right? The understanding, it's not fun, it's not good. But the moment we are able really to understand that as part of this moment in our evolution, right? It becomes a little less painful in a sense, in a moral sense, right? We kind of understand a little better. This is just a process. And it is hard sometimes. Obviously, we don't like to suffer. We don't like to see pain. We don't like anybody to be going through that. But the perspective changes when we look in this spiritual sense, this spiritual side, right? So still a lot to learn, a lot to go through, but it's always wonderful to be together and supporting each other, right? In this moment, we all need to think about death in a different light. I think that helps too, right, Jo? It's when you talk about death, and if you think of the end of everything, that's one thing. Another thing is the continuation of life, and we immortal spirits, like you said, when we put the immortality into this equation here, it changes everything, right?
Completely. It's a completely different discussion, because if it wasn't for this, there would be no discussion.
Exactly. And what gives us the strength and the motivation to keep going and going through all this is definitely a different feeling when we go through difficult times. And we are going through some difficult times, some more difficult than others to some people, but it is definitely another example of taking the strength at this moment that we need to get the strength from somewhere, and God is there, and the spirituality is here with us, and give us a lot to to keep going and keep moving forward. Would you like to, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the Spiritism in Canada? You also experienced a little bit in Dubai. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit of all this and give your final remarks. And then at the end, if you can, bring us our final prayer to thank the spirits for this moments of reflection and teachings.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you to the USSF. I lived a certain time in the Middle East, got to experience a different culture, a different religion, but it just gave me more certainty that we're all alike, that we have the same questions, the same concerns, the same goodwill, and most people are essentially good people. The pandemic has thrown us into a bit of a dilemma of how to continue our kind of a social lives, our community life, in the fear of transmitting this terrible virus. Our Spiritist group has basically been virtualized, and we're very glad that we have the technology and means to continue to do our lectures. We do education and courses virtually. But it is not the same thing as it was before, right? With the presence, with the sense of community and the ability to be next to other people. It is a period of trial, and it will be over. It will be over, if not a few months, more months later. And what we need to take this opportunity is to reflect a lot on what is the most important aspects of our individual life, our family life, and your community lives. Right, and how we need to continue to be connected, to be alert to the mental anguish that this is causing everyone. And speaking of that, as we finish the last few days of Yellow September for this year, let's not imagine that this is just 1 month a year that we have to be doing this. This is just a reminder that we have to be doing this over and over. The COVID pandemic will go, one day will be over and will be under control. The suicide pandemic is just getting worse. So let's not forget our brothers and sisters who are in help. Let's not point the finger, but most important, let's not turn our back on them. Let's not give up on them with all we can do.
That's right. That's a good reminder.
So,
and on that note, would you close?
Sure.
For all?
God, our Father, creator of us all, we begin this prayer by thanking you for the gift of life, for making us exist in this universe, created just for our purpose, for our well-being. We do not understand all of your means, all your intention for us. So we must have faith that all is done to help us evolve and become better spirits. Give us the strength to withstand our trials. Give us the means to minimize the impact, the pain, and the suffering. Give us the lessons of how we need to proceed. Give us the determination to go through it, no matter the costs, no matter the suffering. Protect all of us in this journey. And we thank thee for your endless mercy that you have always shown to us. So be it.
So be it. Thank you again, Joe, for this great talk and this interaction that has been really important to all of us, that we can continue bringing these thoughts in our lives and pay attention, like you said, let's pay attention around us on everyone who is in in this condition. And if we do, that we can reach out. We know that sometimes it's hard for people to reach out. So definitely let's do it. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for watching.
Thanks. And thank you, everyone. We hope to see you again next Saturday in this series of talks that at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And next week, October 3rd, we're having our friend Jussara Korngold, also from New York, and also our president of the United States Spiritist Federation. She'll be bringing the topic Kardec's communications and advices. So let's not miss that one. And have a great weekend, everyone. Keep safe, and I'll see you then. Bye-bye.